Good morning, Dan. Thanks a lot for joining our Inside Sharing show. It's great to seeing you. I hope one day that we're gonna meet in person. I can give you a big hug and we can have a cup of beer together. All right?
Sounds good. Sounds good. It's been a long time coming.
I know. And on behalf of our audience, I want to say thank you for spending your time to join and sharing your stories, and we would really appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. This is exciting. I'm excited.
I'm too. Dan, you've been in Vietnam for 8 years, right? So you know our culture. It's going to be a great honor for our audience. We can have you to have introduce a little bit about yourself and the works that you do. Would you please do that?
Sure, sure. So I'll try to make it not too boring, but hey, I'm done. I'm currently 39 years old, just turned 39. So on the way to 30, I have a beautiful wife. I have a baby boy who is turning 2 this month. So
Ah,
that's been a journey on its own. And I'm originally from the Netherlands. I was born there. I grew up there. And then in my mid 20s, I joined a company that eventually took me to the States. So I lived in the States for about 5 years between New York and Chicago. And then I moved to Asia, I think 9 or 10 years ago, first to Singapore and then eventually to Vietnam.
hmm.
And here currently, after, a whole journey of different experiences, I'm currently the CEO of two companies. So one is Drinkflex, which is a network of co-working spaces, and then the other one is FlexOS, which is a company really helping HR teams with delivering employee experience. And they're both a little bit related, but we can probably get into that a little bit.
Wow. Hey, being a one CEO already hard. Now you've been CEOs for two companies. So congratulations for that. I'm not sure how you're gonna manage your time balancely between works and life. Tell us that secret though.
I mean, the time management is definitely the hardest part of it, right? So we
Yep.
know that even trying to schedule this interview, we bounced around the time slot quite a bit just to try and fit it in. And then it's always like very unreliable, unpredictable in terms of the schedule.
Yep.
But yeah, basically what I've learned is that like the number one thing is that I have to really keep reprioritizing on what's the most important.
Mm.
I always talk to my team when they join that one of the things I really focus on is like urgent versus important.
Mm.
The Eisenhower matrix. It's very very easy to get dragged down by what's urgent, and especially when you don't know what is really urgent. So then people get they open their email inbox in the morning and they open Teams or Slack and they start to respond to emails and messages and getting into meetings, and then before you know it, the whole day has passed, and you ask, well, what have we actually accomplished today?
Mm.
And the answer is usually, well, I was super busy talking to people, right? So, the same for myself. Like I try to keep refocusing on, okay, what's the stuff that's really going to drive impact? What's the stuff that really matters? Which obviously comes back a lot to people. And so, in doing two things at the same time, but even within one company, you're wearing multiple hats, right? Especially early stage. So yeah, it's always like a big job of prioritizing all the different things that we're doing. And that's the thing I need to master more, right? So even now that I feel like sometimes like, okay, things are flowing quite well, and then it gets again to the point where there's way too much going on, and then I reflect on that same thing of like, what's really important, what's really going to move us forward, what's really going to make the team happier, and then it's very easy also to like remove things again. So yeah, it's an ongoing battle basically, but hopefully getting better at it over time.
You do it well, my friend. You do it well. So I'm sure that you're gonna manage well and share that practice with more people so that they can understand what's important and what actually is driving the business and driving the results and differentiate between the two. And I want to say congratulations for the achievement and the amazing journey that you've been having. Not a lot of people can do that, Dan. And this talk it's gonna help us to explore that path together because people will only see at the when you are in the top of the mountain, but they would not see the whole journey that gets you there, right? And all the struggles, all of the pains, all of the rewarding moments also. So let's use this opportunity as a way for us to reflect and relieve the moment, all right? And then when I was young, I let's move us back in time. So we when I was young, I wanted to become an astronaut. Part of that is because of my personality. So, flying in, jumping in a different planet seems to be suiting me very, very well. As an introvert, right? So, when you were young, then what was your dream about your future?
So when I was young, I was dreaming about many different things,
Ah.
and now reflecting on that, some of them make sense, some of them really don't make sense. So when I was younger, I always wanted to be a chef, and when I tell my wife that, she said, "Well, it's really good for the world that you didn't pursue that career because you're terrible at cooking. I cannot even like prepare an egg well." So that was, I think, one of the first ones. And then later on, I got really interested in journalism. So you talked about stories. Like I was always like really intrigued in storytelling, and I wanted to become basically like a journalist, like a writer. And that one, even though I didn't become an official journalist, I do think that like when I look at everything I'm doing right now, I always get the most joy out of like meeting people, understanding their story, and then somehow sharing that with the world. So creating content is definitely like the thing I like most about what I'm doing right now. So at least something from my youth has kind of continued into my current life. Yeah.
Steve Jobs basically say that once they we can only connect in the dots backwards. So life has its reason, its way to bring you all the way backward to what your dream was, right? You wanted to become a journalist, right? Then now you write a lot of story, connecting a lot of people, and bring that into the story of your life. So it's beautiful. And but from being a chef, want to be a chef, want to be a journalist, to what you are doing now are really different. All right. You need to tell us that journey. How is that whole thing happen? At the beginning, though.
I think honestly, Hi, I think it's just because I'm extremely impatient, and so I don't really have the patience to really go on any long journey.
Oh.
So my long journey is basically a series of really really short journeys. So even though maybe like initially I really wanted to become a journalist, and actually at some point when I was still in my early high school days, I had a weekend job to work at a local newspaper, and I basically would edit longer articles into shorter articles to publish them on their website. Which knowing my age, right? Like when newspapers started doing websites, that was like a very new thing. So I was kind of like helping them with that, and then actually like from there, again, I didn't want to like go onto a long journey, so I did like a bunch of like smaller things. And actually, when I was around 14 or 15, I also got too impatient to be in school, so I actually dropped out of high school. So after 15, I never went to school again. I took just like a part-time job, basically, just something to do and to make some money. So I started working full-time really when I was 15. Then eventually got recruited by a company that was doing a lot in kind of like digital marketing, online marketing, content, websites. And I started working there. And I did that for, I think, about 6 or 7 years. And then eventually kind of felt like, hey, it's really time for something new. Then applied for a bunch of jobs and then got hired by Ogilvy. And I remember like at that point in time when I got hired by Ogilvy, I felt like it was a really big recognition of the fact that you can still get a good job even without a degree, right? Even without like university diploma, but even without high school diploma, I had nothing to show, right? So just based on what I had learned over those years at the startup, I was offered that job. And then when I finally got that job, I felt like, okay, now I feel a little bit less worried about that terrible decision I made. And then from there, I think like once you're in that kind of company, once you're in that system, right? I'm sure the same for you when you're in one of those big companies. Then when you apply for jobs, people don't really ask that much anymore about background and diplomas and stuff like that, because they're like, oh, if you worked at that level for that kind of company, you're okay. So then I really started sort of going from, I started in content, so still a little bit of the editorial side. I started in content. I got to know more about the digital media side and kind of like digital marketing, digital advertising side in that role. And then when I moved from Amsterdam to New York, where their head offices are, that's really when I got into more the strategic side. So actually, instead of just focusing on the output, like a piece of content or some online campaign, started thinking much more strategically about like how really big brands. So I was working for, IKEA, for DuPont, for American Express, Ford, and started helping those brands really think about, digital and social media, especially at that point in time, was really new. So how do you use it from a very strategic perspective? And from that, I got much more into the strategy and consulting side. And so that already led me a little bit more into, okay, actually there is this sort of repeatable process that you learn over time, which is actually very much the same as storytelling, which is you need to get a lot of data in and a lot of insights in and a lot of kind of like analyze a lot of that information and then create some kind of an insight, right? The theme of today, create some kind of an insight, something novel, something that's both easy to understand for people, but has something new, like, hey, I never thought about it that way, and then turn that into, a decision around product or, budget spending or something like that. And actually that repeatable progress that I especially learned under my boss in New York, that repeatable process, I actually still apply to everything. So even though today maybe I may not be doing that specific job anymore, but the process of trying to gather as much information as possible and then synthesizing that into an insight and then turning that into an idea or a strategy or a decision, that's still what I apply today, even though the job may be completely different. But that's really what I picked up during that time.
And then from that space for digital marketing and moving on to what you are doing now, actually there's some linkage in there, but majority that is not. So tell us how that happens, though.
Yeah, I mean, it happened again in like you said, right? When people are looking at like something in isolation, you're looking at, okay, you're here and that means something, right? So you're a CEO, that means something to the world. But like you said, there's like a lot of steps towards that and kind of like a lot of like micro journeys before you get to that place, which by the way, often doesn't feel like you're on top of a mountain. Feels more like you're somewhere in the valley screaming and trying to solve problems. But yeah, but the journey there, I mean, I was with Ogilvy until maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So eventually I moved from New York to Chicago, from Chicago to Singapore, and then from Singapore to Saigon, still all with the same company. And then there was something that really interesting that happened, which again goes back to the idea of, learning, gathering insights, gathering data, coming up with something out of that. And that was really when I was working on a couple of brands here in Vietnam. A lot of the work that I do is, sitting in focus groups, getting to know certain demographics, certain groups of people, doing kind of like online research, like what are the trends in that group. And I was doing research for a couple of brands that were all targeting young Vietnamese, so maybe from like 16 to 25 years old, because advertisers love to reach that group, right? Because they're still malleable for making certain brand decisions before they're locked in. And so in a lot of that research and a lot of those conversations, I started hearing this thing over and over again, and it became something that I couldn't really let go, even though it wasn't really that applicable to my work. And it was really the theme of young Vietnamese saying that they kind of felt like they are stuck in between two different cultures. With on the one hand, maybe it's like Tuesday morning right now as we're recording this, and people get on their motorbike or like on a Grab and they drive to work and they go to an office building and they have a really professional job and they work with like other cool young people and they're really part of this like really modern world, right? But then when they go back home, and especially, it's even worse during like periods like TED, right? You go back home and you're actually not that cool, young, modern professional. No, you're still a baby. You're still the child of your parents and of the larger family and the society. And so the questions aren't like, wow, how is your self-development going? And what opportunities are you seizing? And what cool groups are you a part of? No, the question is always, when are you getting married and where are my grandchildren? And so I just keep hearing that insight of, I feel stuck in between those two cultures because those two worlds are so different from each other. how do I find myself? Like, who am I? Am I this or am I that? I cannot be both, right? Or I cannot be something in between. And so that's where, again, when you're working in marketing, you're using an insight like that to, create some advertising campaign that says, be your best self, buy this brand, right? But I felt like there was something like much more powerful to be done than just sell something that people probably don't even need. And that's basically when I came up with the idea of creating like a magazine, a brand, like a media platform around finding your purpose and living your life rather than what other people want from you. And so I established that originally, don't tell my old boss, but originally while I was still working in the agency. And then eventually when it grew and when it got more traction, I eventually left the agency to start doing that full time. And then the whole journey towards where I am now makes sense because that was the first time I really started focusing on people and who are they, and not to sell them something, but to make them happier, to make individual people more content and build a life that they want to live. And so now everything we're doing in terms of like creating an office that you love coming to, or helping companies create organizations where there's great attention for you as an individual person, not just as an employee, and delivering a really personalized employee experience. All of that all comes from that same idea of, at the end of the day, we're here on Earth for a very short period of time. Let's really make that time as amazing as possible.
Wow.
So yeah, that really started there. And there you are. Then we are here today. That's the whole story. Done.
Hey, Dan, thanks a lot for sharing that. Nobody gonna tell the boss, okay? The boss
Let's
might
keep it a
listen to
secret,
this
yeah.
conversation somewhere, but it's okay because you respond to the insights that many people in this part of in this country, but I think that in many other countries also wanting to have, right, want to have their voice heard. They want to be happy, they want to be like recognized for their what matters to them, right? So speak up and stuff. So uh, I'm curious just to know from that insights and then build into what you are doing now. That requires a lot of different skill sets, a lot of learning and practices that you need to embody into yourself, right? Because employee experience, it require you to understand about the human behavior, like a lot of deep psychology practices involved. And you coming from the world of marketing until that world, you need to build different like bucket of knowledge to equip you and the team to lead into that direction. How did you do that though?
So the interesting thing there is that it does all come back to the very same principle, which is that if you want to sell something, even currently if I say I'm selling happiness, right?
Yeah.
If you want to sell something, you have to understand that particular person and what matters to them. And in order to do that, of course, like you have to also understand how people in bigger ways, how they think and behave and act. And so, like you said, you have to understand the psychology behind it, right? You have to understand motivation. You have to understand culture, right? You have to understand all the sort of like building blocks that lead someone to who they are. And this is not something that, again, I do because it's my job or because like I need to know it for work. It's just like my unstoppable curiosity in terms of how people work. And every day obviously is an opportunity to understand that even more. But, one thing that my team knows and probably they get very tired of very quickly is that I'm always sharing, hey, I listened to this interview, I listened to this podcast, I read this article, I did this course. Like my main thing is like, I just always want to be learning and I always want to be growing. Just to understand the human psychology better, to understand people better, and therefore be better placed to help them. So it's just nonstop learning, to be honest. And it's something, again, like if you have to do it for work or it's like you feel like it's a chore, like how I felt about learning in school, then again, this advice is not applicable, right? It's not like, oh, everyone should be learning, you should be reading more, you should be listening more. It's just because it's something I enjoy doing. And I really enjoy that kind of like that feeling of uncovering a new insight or learning something new or learning something about something that I already know, but in a different light, and sharpening the vision. And it's just like an internal thing that I really, really enjoy doing.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that then. And I want to put the point here because you're selling happiness, right? And every single person of us want a simple thing is to be happy, right? And for a very long time, it looks like that leaders fail to do that for the employees. Fail to do
Mm.
it miserably. They can only offer the job that the people can have. Like they can make the money they can have here and there on the benefits, but the happiness piece always the missing piece, right? And it's we need to say thank you to the pandemic that that triggers a lot of people to look back at what they truly want in life and speak up for what they want, and that create the whole notion of changing and stuff. So
Yeah.
if leaders in this part of the world want to create a happiness culture for the workforce, uh, and you've been in Vietnam for long, so how can we specifically help leaders in this country to build that up and then.
So the simple answer is that probably we can't, because if it's not something that's intrinsic to you, like if you don't have that sort of motivation,
Mm.
then it's really hard to make that someone's agenda,
Ah.
right? And I think this basically goes back to something that you were talking about before, which is that, what is a leader really there for? I think a lot of leaders, and we can call them leaders or quote unquote leaders or like capital L or small L, right? But if you're leading an organization, if you're leading a team, your own motivation may just be that you want to progress in your career, or that you like to manage people or to boss people around. It may be that you're really focused on business results. It's like you have some kind of motivation around making the company grow. So I think actually for most people, they will not really be that interested in that topic, even though, of course, there's a lot of research that shows that if you make your team happier, your business will do better, right? Because at the end of the day, any company is just a group of people. So yeah, you have to recruit the right people to join together to build something and to execute something. But you also have to make sure that those people really enjoy their time doing that, right?
Mm.
So if a business is just a group of people, and then of course, if those people are happier, the business results will be better. But I think again, for most people, it's just not really a topic that interests them. I think most people are not really caring that much about their employee happiness. And I think a lot of people don't even really care about their own happiness, or they think that happiness is, again, achieving some kind of a big thing rather than being happy in the day to day of living your life, right?
Mm.
So I think that notion generally isn't there. However, for leaders and people who are interested in it and who are kind of trying to find that way of like, hey, I want my employees' time to be spent well, that when they work in this company, they get something out of it beyond just the paycheck. So it's not so transactional, like you do work for me and I pay you, and then that's our entire relationship.
Mm.
The starting point really is to understand again the motivation, right?
Mm.
So the biggest thing that I think companies can do at this point in time, or even individual team leaders, is to make sure that the purpose of the company and the purpose of the person, that they overlap as much as possible. And to be very honest, like sometimes that's not about looking at your current team and saying, how can we have your purpose align more with the company purpose? I think a lot of the times it really starts with, do I even have the right people in the team? And I think that's not only from the perspective of, did I pick the right people, but also did people pick the right jobs? Because I think a lot of the conflicts and challenges that I see, even in our own team, it's usually about the fact that there's just a misalignment between motivations, that someone took that job because they're interested in the brand or the team or what it stands for, but actually not really being critical towards themselves of, well, what would make me happy, right? So if I'm going to spend 40 hours per week somewhere, or in startups 50 or 60 hours per week somewhere, what would make me truly happy, right? Therefore, what is my purpose? What is my motivation? What do I want to achieve? Because they're not super critical about it to themselves, it's then really hard to find the right role and find the right organization, right? So I think it really goes both ways.
Mm.
But I think as a manager, you also have to be quite frank and say, look, your life is so short. Like, why are you wasting your time with us? Because I can just see that this is not where you're supposed to be.
Mm.
You're not getting something out of this other than, loon at the end of the month, right? You're not getting something more meaningful out of it. Therefore, I don't think that this is going to serve either of us really well, because you could probably find something that better fits what you're looking for, that helps you progress towards your goal and towards your purpose, while you're currently keeping a spot blocked for maybe someone out there that would love to be a part of this specific mission and this specific team and this specific way of working. So I think it really starts with like a very, and it's sometimes hard, right? Because the last thing we want to do is create more work for ourselves. But I think it's that constant evaluation of, do we really have all the right pieces together? And can we really answer that question with an honest yes, that we know our purpose and we know our team's purposes, and yes, they overlap.
Wow, very powerful thing you shared, Dan. At 7 o'clock today, I talked to Jim Collins' team, and Jim, right? He's an author of Good to Great and stuff. So basically, we talk about the idea, like first who, then what, bring the right person into the system. But then we also talk about, like taking the wrong person away from the system is also as most important, and it is that we bring the right person into the to the team. And thanks for re-emphasize that today, Dan. I really think that that's very important. But a lot of us as a leader have a soft side of our heart, and our mind, and we have to suffer having, like bad apples within the organization. Not really bad, but it's not right fit of apple in the organizations, and that somehow create more damages, to the system than benefit, right?
But sometimes that can be, like, I think your point is right. And by the way, I love Jim Collins, and I use it a lot in my work. But I think you're right in the sense that we do have a soft spot. And I think we sometimes will see it as like, oh, I don't want to inflict pain on someone by telling them they're not a fit. I actually think that you're doing more of a disservice to someone by keeping them in a role that doesn't fit, because the person themselves, they may not always see it, right? They may be so stuck in that position and the idea of like, well, this is my job and everyone complains about work, so actually it's probably logical that I don't enjoy my job. And actually doesn't take that sort of reflection on, hey, actually I do have choice, right? One of the key pillars of the happiness philosophy is, getting it out of people's heads that they don't have choice, right? There is no such thing as being stuck. There's just something like not taking action. You always have choice. There's always options for you out there, right? So because someone can be really in that mindset of like, I'm a this and that at this company. Yeah, it sucks. Yeah, I don't like doing it, but that's life. That's my job. I cannot change anything about it. Sometimes it takes that external person, like a manager, to say, actually, let's have that conversation. Like, what is it that would motivate you? If you could write down your dream job, what would it be? And if you compare that with what you're currently doing, like how much of a gap is there? And if that's a gap that we can bridge together, then let's go on that journey, right? Let's go from today to 6 months from now and make incremental changes so that over time you get closer to what you actually want to do. But if the gap is just so wide because the difference between what you want to be doing intrinsically and what you're currently doing is so wide, then maybe it doesn't make sense. And then again, you may be doing someone a bigger service to let them go than to keep them in that role, or to say, hey, let's set a certain time frame within which you're going to find a better position and help the person towards finding a better position. Maybe it's within the company, maybe it's somewhere else, but then you may actually do a lot more for that person than thinking, oh, let me be nice to them and let's keep them in that role and let them suffer and let the team suffer and let the organization suffer. And since you mentioned apples, I mean, we have to also talk about the fact that just one single demotivated employee can ruin it for everyone. Like, no one wants to come into a workplace where even just 1 or 2 out of 8 people in a team just come in kind of like grunting and complaining and, I hate Mondays and I hate work and this and that, right? You
Yep.
just know it's going to drag down the whole team.
Mm.
Whereas we also know the opposite, which is that if you put like two or three really high spirited, high performers into a team, everyone stretches further, right? Everyone becomes a better version of themselves because they're in the context of, performance, they're in a context of people wanting to do better. So I think again, like at the end of the day, we have to be a little bit like, a doctor, examining the body and seeing like if there is a pain point there. We do have to address it. It doesn't get better by ignoring it. I think that's the thing I've learned the hard way
Yeah.
over many years, right? If you want to just ignore it and say, oh, let's not take the action, let's not have that conversation, let's just keep it going, it's only going to it never gets better by itself, right? It's only going to get worse.
And I pay a lot of my own money when I started in my own company because of having bad apples like that in my team. And that I took that lesson to heart also, Dan. Um, uh,
But the point is that like those people are, I think that's the distinction we have to make. Those people they are not bad apples. They are just bad apples within that specific fruit bowl, right?
yep.
Within that context, they are the bad apple. But you take that one out, they may be perfect in another team or another organization. They're perfectly great people, right? It's just that like the fit, and I think that's what it always comes down to. Is there a fit between what you want and what you stand for and what you seek out and what we offer? Is there a good fit? If not, then why force it, right? So I think, because sometimes people feel like, oh, like you're calling me a bad apple, you're calling me, it's like, no. But I just believe that there's a better situation or a better context for you to give you what you want, and have that work within that system.
Wow. Earlier then in that talk you share about the word knowing, all right? And to be honest with you, there's a lot of people living next to us that don't even know what they want intrinsically or extrinsically also, and they wandering in the dark also in the lights, right? So how can you help people to find what they want though?
It's the it's the hardest question, right? Because it's the I don't know what I don't know. If someone doesn't get that spark of, hey, let me actually investigate my life, let me actually look at everything, make an inventory of my whole self, right? Work, life, my family, my friends, my social status, right? If they don't get that sort of spark to even go on that journey to self discover, then they will always be kind of like, searching in the dark or in the light, right? So I think the first point is that, like, especially for young people, like a lot of the times, like I wouldn't be thinking about that, right? When I was like 23, 24, I wasn't like, oh, let me like sit down and write out what makes me happy, what makes me sad, what makes me, I wouldn't have thought about that ever, right? So you have to come across that point, and it could either be because you get into a really bad place and then you realize you have to do something to get out of it. It can be just because you come across something like your podcast series and you pick up something or you see a clip of something and you're like, hey, actually, I never thought about it that way. I should explore. But the point is that people don't really have that. They don't have that thing that drives them to explore. Therefore, they never go on the journey. Because even though the journey is very difficult, I'm sure, as you've been through it as well, right? Like the journey is very difficult and you have to be very honest with yourself and it can be very painful. But at the end of the day, it's a process that we all know works, right? The process of doing the inventory and starting to shape your life towards where you want to be, not where you currently are. We all know it works, right? You can do it by yourself. You can get a coach. There's many ways to do it. It's just like, what would get someone started? And I think that's always the biggest challenge. That's what I remember from those days when we did the magazine and we were trying to share stories of other people who had found their purpose and how they got there, is that a lot of people would say, oh, I read that story, it was super inspiring. I was like, okay, so what did you do? Oh, nothing, because that's not for me. That's for that famous KOL. That's for that entrepreneur. That's for that person who joined that charity. I'm not like that. I'm just a normal person. So people don't have that feeling of, oh, hey, I also should reevaluate my life and see what would be a better version of that, right? Because I think, again, people just get very stuck in this idea of this is what it is, nothing to do about it,
right? And then that because of that, it set them apart from the crowd also, right? So those who really
Yes.
do something, reflect on it,
Yes.
and learn from it, we always stand out and have a different path. Then I have two last questions for the conversations today, and I really enjoy your thinking. And my wife and I, we have been in the quest to help people to improve their thinking. So that is our purpose for the time being. So because we both believe that our ability to think these days is diminishing, and if we can find a secret, from great thinkers that we can share to others, and if they can learn, reflect, and apply, they can improve their ability to think. And the great doings come from great thinking first also. Uh, so Dan, how have you been helping yourself to expand your ability to think, my friend?
I mean, again, it's really going back to what I shared earlier, which is that I also need some kind of a spark, because I think that it's very easy to kind of read a bunch of books or like learn something, and then you would kind of say, "Oh, I know everything," right? Like,
Mm,
and then talk to everyone as if you know everything, right? Obviously, no, you know more than yesterday, but you definitely don't know everything, right? You
mm,
could spend a lifetime learning and still not know everything.
mm,
So for me, it's really getting kind of as much new inputs as possible,
mm,
and then that leads me to new thoughts or new visions on something that I thought before.
mm,
So even this idea of happiness, right, as just as a practical example. So I was always really curious, right, when I started my company and we started interviewing people and we started getting those stories out of people that somehow find something that makes them happy,
mm,
right? I was always like really interested. Then I found out about this whole. So anecdotally, I now knew I could share with people. Oh, here's what I've learned from interviewing all those people. Then I learned about this like whole kind of section of psychology, which is called positive psychology, which is
mm,
really focused on, again, the psychology of happiness, right?
mm,
And it turns out there's like a whole system behind how you can be happier, right? And
mm,
so there's a whole process that you can follow, and there's a lot of thinking around. There's a lot of research about actually the science of happiness. So then I studied that. Like I actually did like a full on like 6 month course to really study all the principles of positive psychology and therefore of happiness.
mm,
Then of course that's like 5 years ago. I could have stopped and said, well, I've done the course, right?
mm,
I've learned everything about happiness, so now I'm the happiness expert. But actually then, keep reading, keep learning, keep listening
mm,
to new insights actually constantly either puts that information into a different context
mm,
or gets you to look at it like completely differently, or have like a whole new stream of ideas. So to me, the thinking really comes from getting inspired by some kind of a spark or some new piece of information or someone who shares their new way of thinking.
mm,
And then that's sort of like, that's sort of like data in, and then there's the process, and then a new insight comes out. Then it may be that I'm doing something completely different and I'm not actively thinking about it, but somehow all that information lands in a certain way,
mm.
and then suddenly a new insight appears. And sometimes it feels like an epiphany, right? Oh, why did I never think about this in this way before? And you obviously know, right? I like from running a business, like this is what you need to be doing 24/7, right? Because if you just look at the same challenges and you don't have new insights, you don't have like new information, new data, you're going to go at the same problem in the same way, and you're never going to get to anywhere. You may sustain something, but you're never going to get to anywhere great.
Mm.
So actually getting all those new insights and then letting that land in a certain way, and then out of that comes a new insight, then suddenly you have something that actually makes you think differently.
Mm.
And when you think differently, then you can do differently, right? To your
Yep.
point. When
Right.
you do differently, then the real changes happen. So it's kind of like a process, which again, not everyone likes to do it. I just happen to like it a lot.
Thanks a lot for sharing that, my friend. So, and earlier in this conversation, you mentioned about like looking at the things that you know in a different lens, so that
Mhm.
seeing how other people do. Because I met so many people in this part of the world with the mindset of been there, done that, know everything, and the conversation with them is really really painful. Thanks for
It's because
sharing
you
it.
talk
Yeah.
to too many consultants. That's why. You always have that mindset.
I'll ask you the last questions and then we both carry on with what we need to do for the day, all right? And it's about the future a little bit. So we knew when you were young you want to become a chef, and your wife said that thanks God that you're not one. And then you want to become a journalist, but you're not having the patience enough to stay in that space. And thanks the world, I need to thank that also because you get into a different space and making greater impact differently, right? So we want to head into the future a little bit here, Dan. Is there anything that exciting that you are working on and you want to share with our audience so that we can celebrate with you in advance?
Yeah, I mean, probably it's not super work related. I
Oh.
think what I'm really interested in is you do see companies generally getting more interested, and again, whether that's like real intrinsic motivation or just because the market demands it.
Mm,
But I do think companies nowadays start to focus more on people
mm,
and on treating them well
mm,
and on finding ways to deliver work as something that's built around the employee
mm.
rather than sort of like it's the company and you're lucky to have a job, which used to be the attitude very much in Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that whole, like a little bit like factory mentality.
Mm,
Here's 100 jobs. I just need 100 people. Anyone could come in and do that job. But now that we're tapping more into people for their creativity and for their sense of innovation and collaboration to get great things done as teams, I think the companies are now starting to focus a lot more on how do we engage people really well, which really means, again, going back to the beginning of the conversation, you
mm.
need to understand those people and what they're looking for.
Yep.
So I think in the future there will be a much greater focus on that, and then linking that to what we're actually doing.
Mm,
That's basically really where I hope that we have the opportunity to just partner with more and more companies to say, well, if that's the journey you want to go on, if you want to go on that journey of I want to understand my employees better, I want to build a world of work around them rather than building it around what we want, and delivering that in a way that really feels much more exciting, much more interesting, and again, really much more aligned to people's own purpose and their own goals.
mm.
I think if we can somehow be a part of that, that would be fantastic. So that's definitely where I'm going to put a lot of my energy over the next months and years to come. And no cooking, no cooking.
And then those leaders, right? Those manager and leaders was one hired by employed by other people also. So they should know better how they felt back then when they under the
You
old
think so?
management style. So it's the time for them to make the change, and it has to be intrinsically that they want to do it that way for the better workplace for their employees. And look at this, a lot of leaders in this part of the world or this country alone that I know of, by the time they retire, nobody cares about their existence anymore. And then
Correct.
you contribute works for 30 years, 40 years for a company, and by the time that you get off the boat, nobody cares about you, nobody talks about you. And what legacy do you leave, back for you and for the other people, right? So that's pain to me. That's pain, that's not a success. And so your works matter, man, and we wish you to have all the resource that you need, all of the support that you need to bring that works to many other companies, so that they can create a culture that help people to find meaning in their works and happy in their works in life. Okay.
Appreciate it, and yeah, great to have you on that journey with us. And I think you're really hitting, as a last note, on probably the most important fundamental insight, which is that you want to make sure that all the time that you've spent on this planet, that there's something that comes out of that, right? Some kind of a
Mm,
legacy. Not everyone can be someone that will still be remembered 300 years from now, but I do think we all can contribute in some way to something bigger than just ourselves. And I think, again, like going back to the science of happiness, when you talk to 80, 90-year-olds who are gearing towards the end of their lives, and you ask them what do they regret and like what makes them the most happy looking back, it's never, oh, I was so happy showing up 9 to 5, 5 days a week for some job and doing
Mm,
that job. It was always about people. It was always about relationships. It was always about making progress, about accomplishing something. So I think we all have to keep that in mind that, again, like life is way too short to spend even an hour on something that you don't enjoy doing. And the same thing for managers, for leaders, right? For yourself and for your teams, right? Try to make that time spent like so meaningful. I
mm.
think the world really deserves it.
Wow. Thanks for that, and thanks for a very beautiful closing for this beautiful conversation. I really enjoy it, and I really look forward to a day that we can have a beer together, all right?
Very soon, very soon.
My friend, thanks a lot for joining our show and sharing your stories, your insights, and great advices. And I wish you all the best, and I look forward to meeting you one day, okay?
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye then.